In the contemporary entertainment industry, pathways into film and television are often shaped as much by proximity to power as by talent or preparation. Large studios, influential producers, and established figures can determine who gains access to auditions, introductions, and early roles. For newcomers, these relationships frequently blur the line between opportunity and dependence, particularly in environments where informal networking carries as much weight as formal hiring processes. Within this system, Tyler Perry occupies a singular position. Over several decades, he has built one of the most expansive and independent entertainment empires in the United States. His rise from financial hardship to ownership of a large-scale studio complex has been widely publicized and often cited as a model of self-made success. Perry's influence extends beyond writing and directing. He controls production pipelines, casting decisions, and distribution partnerships. For aspiring actors, association with his projects can represent both visibility and long-term career stability. Mario Rodriguez entered this landscape from outside the traditional acting track. Before pursuing film roles, his background included modeling work in Division I college football, experiences that placed him adjacent to entertainment culture without fully embedding him in it. Like many seeking to transition into acting, he relied on informal introductions and chance encounters rather than established agency representation. In this context, a personal connection to a powerful industry figure carried particular significance. Rodriguez's introduction to Perry reportedly occurred through a fitness environment rather than a professional audition. Such settings are not unusual in an industry where networking often happens outside offices and studios. For individuals early in their careers, these encounters can feel informal and encouraging, reinforcing the idea that success may come through personal rapport rather than institutional processes. When those connections lead to paid roles, they can quickly become central to an individual's professional identity. By late 2025, this broader context formed the backdrop for a series of legal actions involving Perry and actors connected to his productions. Separate lawsuits allege misconduct tied to professional relationships, placing renewed focus on how authority functions within privately controlled studios. These cases did not emerge in isolation. They followed years of public conversation about accountability, consent, and structural imbalance in entertainment workplaces. Rodriguez's lawsuit, filed toward the end of that year, entered this already charged environment. It positioned his experience within a framework of alleged exploitation connected to professional access and advancement. While the filing outlined specific claims, its broader significance lay in how it challenged the informal systems that govern entry into elite creative spaces. The suit also named corporate entities alongside individuals, raising questions about institutional responsibility and oversight. In response, Perry's legal team emphasized an alternative interpretation of the same professional relationship. They pointed to communications and interactions that, in their view, reflected mutual respect and ongoing contact rather than coercion. This contrast between accounts highlighted a recurring tension in similar cases: how to interpret relationships that combine mentorship, financial support, and personal familiarity within highly unequal power structures. As these narratives began to circulate, the situation drew attention not only because of the individuals involved, but because it reflected a larger pattern within the industry. The debate was no longer limited to whether specific allegations were accurate, but extended to how success is negotiated in environments where opportunity is concentrated in a few hands. The question became less about a single career path and more about the systems that shape access, loyalty, and silence. At this stage, the matter remained unresolved. Competing claims, legal filings, and public statements outlined sharply different interpretations of the same professional history. What was clear, however, was that the case had shifted discussion away from individual ambition and towards structural power. It raised enduring questions about how mentorship operates in practice, how accountability is enforced, and how emerging talent navigates industries where personal relationships often substitute for transparent processes. This context sets the foundation for understanding the conflict as it developed, not as an isolated dispute, but as part of a broader examination of authority and dependence within modern entertainment. As the lawsuit became public, attention shifted from the broader structure of the industry to the specific allegations described in the filing. According to the complaint, the professional relationship between Mario Rodriguez and Tyler Perry evolved over time from initial encouragement into a series of private encounters that Rodriguez now characterizes as coercive. These interactions were presented as extensions of career development, often framed around discussions of scripts, roles, or future opportunities. Rodriguez alleges that many of these meetings took place at Perry's Los Angeles residence rather than in formal office settings. The complaint describes these invitations as professionally motivated on the surface, but claims that the atmosphere changed once he arrived. According to the filing, alcohol was introduced, conversations drifted away from work, and boundaries that would normally exist in a professional environment were not maintained. Rodriguez asserts that this pattern repeated over several years, gradually reshaping what he understood to be expected of him. The lawsuit outlines a progression of alleged conduct, beginning with inappropriate physical contact and escalating to an incident in November 2018 that Rodriguez identifies as sexual battery. In his account, he states that he repeatedly asked for the interaction to stop and that his objections were ignored. He further claims that the encounter was accompanied by promises of long-term financial security and career support, language that he interpreted as tying compliance to professional survival. Following these encounters, Rodriguez alleges that Perry provided him with cash payments, described in the complaint as $5,000 on multiple occasions. Rodriguez's legal team frames these payments as an effort to maintain silence and reinforce dependence. They argue that the money functioned less as a gift and more as a mechanism that deepened the imbalance between them, particularly given Rodriguez's lack of steady income and limited access to industry alternatives. These claims did not emerge in isolation. Months earlier, another actor connected to a Perry production, Derek Dixon, filed a separate lawsuit alleging similar patterns of quid pro quo behavior and retaliation. Dixon's filing described a workplace environment in which professional advancement was allegedly conditioned on personal compliance, contributing to growing concern within the industry about the internal culture of Perry's operations. Together, the lawsuits prompted broader scrutiny of how informal authority is exercised within privately controlled studios. As these allegations circulated, Perry's legal response focused on challenging their credibility rather than addressing the underlying power dynamics. His defense team released text messages exchanged between Perry and Rodriguez that extended well beyond the time frame of the alleged misconduct. In these messages, Rodriguez reportedly expressed affection, gratitude, and appreciation for Perry's support. He referred to him as brother, thanked him for help during difficult periods, and discussed ongoing financial struggles, including medical and dental expenses. Perry's attorneys presented these communications as evidence that the relationship was consensual and mutually supportive. They argued that continued friendly contact was incompatible with the claim of coercion and suggested that the lawsuit was motivated by financial desperation rather than harm. The defense characterized the case as an attempt to exploit Perry's wealth and public profile, emphasizing the timing of the filing and the scale of the monetary demand. Rodriguez's legal team offered a different interpretation of the same evidence. They argued that the messages reflected a trauma-bonded dynamic common in situations where a powerful figure controls access to resources. According to this view, expressions of gratitude and loyalty do not negate coercion, but instead illustrate how dependence can distort communication. They maintain that Rodriguez's financial vulnerability made it difficult for him to sever contact, even after the alleged misconduct had ended. The presence of Lionsgate as a named defendant added another layer to the conflict. By including a major corporate partner, the lawsuit extended responsibility beyond individual behavior and into institutional oversight. Rodriguez's filing suggests that the studio benefited from Perry's success while failing to intervene or establish safeguards that might have prevented abuse. This aspect of the case raised questions about how much responsibility production partners bear for conditions within independently run creative spaces. Public reaction to these developments was divided. Some observers viewed the allegations as consistent with broader patterns exposed across the entertainment industry over the past decade. Others expressed skepticism, focusing on the friendly tone of the released messages and the absence of contemporaneous complaints. Media coverage reflected this split, often presenting the case as a clash between competing narratives rather than a settled account of events. As the case moved forward, both sides continued to frame the conflict in sharply contrasting terms. Perry maintained his innocence and declined to acknowledge wrongdoing, relying on legal arguments and documentary evidence to counter the claims. Rodriguez, meanwhile, emphasized the emotional and psychological toll of navigating a relationship he says was defined by fear, obligation, and uncertainty. At this stage, no court had evaluated the merits of either position. The allegations, responses, and supporting materials existed side by side, each raising questions about credibility, consent, and the role of power in shaping professional relationships. What remained unresolved was not only the truth of the specific claims, but how such disputes should be assessed in industries where informal access and personal authority are deeply embedded. The conflict thus continued to unfold within a legal and cultural environment already sensitive to issues of exploitation and accountability. Rather than offering clarity, the emerging details deepened the tension between personal testimony and documented communication, leaving the central question suspended as the case proceeded. As the case moves forward, its significance extends beyond the individual claims made by Mario Rodriguez and the defense mounted by Tyler Perry. The lawsuit sits within a broader moment of reassessment across the entertainment industry, where questions about power, access, and accountability remain unresolved. Regardless of the eventual legal outcome, the dispute highlights how informal authority can operate in environments where one individual controls opportunity, resources, and career advancement. One of the central issues raised by the case is the difficulty of defining consent within deeply unequal professional relationships. The allegations do not describe a single isolated incident, but a prolonged dynamic shaped by dependency and expectation. This raises a persistent question for courts and industry observers alike. How should relationships be evaluated when professional survival appears tied to personal compliance, and when communication continues after the alleged misconduct? The competing interpretations of the text messages illustrate this tension clearly. To the defense, the messages suggest mutual respect and voluntary engagement. To the plaintiff, they reflect a survival strategy shaped by financial insecurity and fear of losing access. The legal system will be tasked with determining how much weight such communications should carry when viewed alongside claims of coercion and imbalance. That determination may influence how similar cases are assessed in the future. The inclusion of Lionsgate as a defendant also carries long-term implications. By extending responsibility beyond an individual figure, the lawsuit challenges corporate partners to examine their oversight obligations. It raises questions about how much scrutiny should be applied to privately run studios that operate within larger distribution networks, and whether existing safeguards are sufficient to protect vulnerable workers. Even if liability is not established, the presence of a major corporate entity in the case may prompt changes in compliance practices and internal monitoring. For the industry, the case reinforces the risks inherent in systems that rely heavily on informal access rather than transparent processes. When meetings, auditions, and negotiations take place in private settings without clear boundaries, disputes become harder to resolve and easier to contest. This environment places both emerging talent and powerful figures in positions of vulnerability, where credibility and interpretation can shift rapidly in the public eye. Public reaction to the lawsuit underscores how divided opinion remains on these issues. Some view the case as part of a necessary reckoning, consistent with earlier movements demanding greater accountability from powerful figures. Others see it as an example of how reputations can be challenged through allegations that may never be fully proven. This divide reflects a broader uncertainty about how justice should function in industries built on personal relationships and subjective judgment. At present, no verdict has been reached and no definitive conclusions have been drawn by a court. The facts remain contested and both sides continue to assert fundamentally different versions of events. What is clear is that the case has already altered how power dynamics within entertainment are discussed, particularly when wealth, influence, and opportunity converge in a single individual. In the long term, the outcome may matter less than the questions the case has forced into public view. How should mentorship be structured to prevent abuse? What responsibilities do corporations have when partnering with dominant creative figures? And how should the legal system interpret evidence that reflects both closeness and alleged harm? These questions will persist regardless of the judgment. The case stands as a reminder that success and influence do not eliminate the need for clear boundaries, and that industries built on aspiration must also account for vulnerability. As proceedings continue, the broader impact will likely be felt not only in courtrooms, but in how professional relationships are formed, monitored, and challenged across entertainment as a whole.